next topic, the role of women for the church in Asia. The focus of this topic will be new pathways for the role of women for the church in Asia. We have two speakers, and they are members of the Ecclesia of Women in Asia. It is a forum of Asian Catholic women, theologians, and women doing the theology in Asia. So it is from that group we have two persons speaking to us. The first one is Dr. Stephanie Puen. Stephanie Puen, she teaches theology at the Ateneo de Manila University, run by the Jesuits in the Philippines. Dr. Puen will speak now for 10 to 15 minutes. She is free to reduce the minutes also. So 10 to 15 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Puen, and my contribution to this panel on women is on caring justice as an important concept to develop in Catholic social thought and theology. It's important to talk about women's contexts, especially on how COVID-19 has affected many women. Then I'd like to talk about caring justice, an important concept a colleague, Dr. Rachel Sanchez, and I are working on, which we think is an important path forward for the church and society in addressing women's needs in the future, and an important contribution that the Catholic Church can and should foster to address women's needs. To begin, a just society would recognize women's work in the home and in the workplace as a valuable contribution to the common good and promote women's well-being and flourishing as individuals. Unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought long-standing injustices against working women to the fore and has exacerbated these, framed through the tension of balancing women's needs versus the survival of the business and economy. Women are among the many vulnerable groups affected heavily by the pandemic. Statistically, most of those who lost work and were hard hit were women. All over the world, women have been hit harder by the pandemic, leading some to call the global recession as a she-cession. She-cession refers to the disproportionate impact of a pandemic recession on working women, which leads to greater gender inequality. In the US, at least one study showed that the pandemic has lowered not just women's labor supply but also their wages, worsening an already yawning gender wage gap. UN Women, drawing from the UN Secretary General's policy brief on COVID-19 and women, UN Women's Spotlight on Gender, COVID-19 and the SDGs, UN thematic policy briefs focused on COVID-19, and data from the UN Women's Rapid Gender Assessment, estimates that 740 million women work in the informal economy, and that globally they lost an average of 60% of their income. Industries and sectors that are dominated by women, particularly those in care industries, are more vulnerable to the negative impacts of the pandemic, with women's employment being 19% more at risk compared to men, and with 70% of health and social care workers being women. These existing studies similarly highlight the gendered impact of the pandemic on women's work despite different societal contexts. A similar pattern of unequal gender division negatively affecting Philippine women's work can be established based on international data and local essays or news articles. Related literature concerning women's work during the pandemic account for the gender dimension involved, but these hardly tackle the role of religion and the Christian response needed for working women during this crisis. Delving into the Philippine context, 64% of working Filipino women reported that COVID-19 had adversely affected them. Because of this, the COVID-19 pandemic threatened some of the progress made in achieving gender equality in the global workplace, as working women are forced to take on expanded duties at home and at work at the expense of their mental and physical health. Exacerbated by the pandemic, women have had to work from home and work at home. The expectation to take care of the home as well as work their job has become more prominent and taxing as Filipino women began working from home due to the pandemic. This has thus contributed to women having to let go of work due to the extraordinary demands of childcare amid the pandemic. Parents who should otherwise be working are finding themselves having to stay at home and look after their kids, especially to oversee their kids' online education. Mothers might bear the brunt of this task. Data show that women outnumber men in the ranks of those newly not in the labor force. The double burden of having to take care of domestic duties as well as their career because of patriarchal expectations has also worsened by the increase also in domestic violence, correlated with the increasing isolation of being stuck at home together with loss of income, basic needs, and social safety nets. Thus, while the pandemic has had a negative effect on many different communities, the emerging research and data reveals the extra toll this unprecedented disruption has had on women, who are traditionally expected to shoulder most, if not all, household and childcare responsibilities, even as they build their careers here in the Philippines. The pandemic has also affected women working for the Catholic Church, and the ritual of parish life and attending Mass that anchors people. Thus, the parish, even here in the Philippines, has had to adapt its rituals for people to participate in, not only for the good of the people, but also for the parish, as the parish relies heavily on donations, which have decreased during the pandemic. The work of adapting to the quote-unquote new normal has fallen on the shoulders of the people running the parish daily activities, who are mostly women. Frequently described as the backbone of parishes, women have filled many administrative roles in parishes, and the forced changes brought about by the pandemic has made the work of women more difficult, given limited resources here in Philippine parishes. The UN has also identified 3 major recommendations that ought to be included in a gender-aware response to COVID-19. First, there should be investments in universal, gender-responsive social protection systems to support women's income security. Second, there should be expanded access to affordable, quality childcare services to enable women to remain in or re-enter the workforce. And lastly, there should be a reversal of long-standing inequalities, including unequal division of work at home, the gender pay gap, and pervasive undervaluation of work done by women. However, part of the problem in responding to women's needs and operationalizing these recommendations is that care is undervalued. Since it is primarily associated with women, it has led to an undervaluing of women's labor and contributions to society, not just in the Philippines but elsewhere, as seen in the 3rd recommendation of the UN. Care has also been marginalized in political and macroeconomic discourse, which also serves as a way to analyze what is lacking in present society and imagine alternatives and solutions to the issues that women and society face. Thus, knowing this situation, it is important to ask, how do we care in ways that are responsive to the needs of women today and to show how important care is? Work that Dr. Rachel Sanchez and I are doing on talks about caring justice as an important consideration in responding to the situation of women. We would like to highlight 3 aspects of caring justice in particular. So first, caring for or taking care of and responsibility. Second, care receiving and responsiveness. And third, caring with and solidarity, based on Joanne Tronto's work on an ethic of care and Catholic social thought, which I think is an important contribution that the Church can foster with and for women, not just here in the Philippines or Southeast Asia, but also in other communities. So first, caring for or taking care of and responsibility. Caring for or taking care of the one cared about entails taking on responsibility for the unmet need and finding ways to address it. It also involves recognizing that one has the capacity to respond to the need. A sense of responsibility comes from interconnected social relationships where a person recognizes that one has done or has failed to do something that has contributed to the needs of others, and so the person should care. Concretely, caring for another from a sense of responsibility entails taking on the burden of meeting the other's unmet needs. The interconnectedness from which a sense of responsibility emerges is akin to Catholic social thought's notion of fraternity and is further enhanced by it. The culture of caring in Catholic social thought is situated within the context of universal fraternity. Hence, this culture is not just for one's kin or nation or in-group, but rather meant to include all, especially the vulnerable and wounded. This culture is also meant to succeed with everyone's contribution, with participation at the grassroots level and synergy and collaboration at the level of institutions and higher organizations. In relation to this phase of caring, privileged irresponsibility is not only a form of ignorance, but also a form of excusing oneself from taking responsibility for caring. For instance, Joanne Tronto gives the example of a breadwinner and head of a traditional household, usually a man, who excuses himself from the responsibility of caring for the home and doing domestic chores because he is already the provider of the family. This would explain why many working mothers find themselves overcompensating and taking on more household responsibilities, despite some instances where working from home has become possible for both parents. Next, the second aspect of caring I want to emphasize is the acknowledgement that reception on the part of the object of care is also important. This stage makes the moral quality of responsiveness important in the actualization of care. When a person gives care to a person, group, or object, the person, group, or object responds in various ways. Some ways can be explicit, like words of gratitude. Some responses can be less explicit, like a child becoming strong from healthy food or a plant growing from being watered. Responsiveness entails mutuality in that the person caring must observe these responses with a sensitivity to needs that have not been met or new needs that may arise, thus continuing the process of care. Rather than seeking to understand the needs of others by putting oneself in their position, the kind or responsiveness here involves considering the position of the other as expressed by the other. The caregiver engages the perspective of the care receiver without assuming that people are the same and interchangeable. The various needs that have emerged in the situation of the pandemic have called for urgent responses from governments and businesses. Joanne Tronto's caring framework and Catholic social thought are reminders to also observe the effect of one's decisions, even though these are intended to help others, and then listen to feedback. Caring about women would therefore eventually entail listening to women's voices and what they have to say about the different arrangements or possibilities presented to them during the pandemic. Moreover, Tronto adds that there is a need to keep a balance between the needs of the caregiver and care receivers. This comment is especially relevant to mothers who are working during the pandemic. Many of them are caregivers of their children, but they also have their own needs. Lastly, caring with and solidarity, plurality, communication, trust, and respect. Caring with entails plurality, communication, trust, and respect, as these qualities will enable people to see caring as a social activity and collective responsibility, where everyone can be involved in a democracy as receiving and giving care. Caring with one another is also expressed in Catholic social thought and Laudato Si, for example, which emphasizes solidarity and plurality by calling for participation and inclusion amidst diversity. Such a community includes each person's active inclusion and participation. This culture of care thus also reminds society of the importance of solidarity, which, as a moral virtue and social attitude born of personal conversion, calls for commitment on the part of those responsible for education and formation. This implies solidity, born of the consciousness that we are responsible for the fragility of others as we strive to build a common future. When we speak of the need to care for our common home, our planet, we appeal to that spark of universal consciousness and mutual concern that may still be present in people's hearts. In Catholic social thought, the quality of communication is often expressed as dialogue. Dialogue and solidarity are not just private matters, but are also crucial in the functioning of social systems and structures. Dialogue plays an important role in fostering a culture of care, especially in response to fear, uncertainty, and conflict. The ability to sit down and listen to others, typical of interpersonal encounters, is paradigmatic of the welcoming attitude shown by those who transcend narcissism and accept others, caring for them and welcoming them into their lives. Being able to encounter and handle conflict without withdrawing away or creating violence is crucial, especially in ensuring that no one is forgotten or left behind. Dealing with fear, uncertainty, and conflict in a healthy manner is formed through an appreciation of one's own identity in relation to others, in the family, in one's local community, in social institutions, and even across borders. The pandemic has brought both interconnectivity and social inequality to the fore. This notion of caring as caring with is therefore very apt. In the Philippines, caring with is expressed through the community pantries that began with the initiative of one Filipina, Ana Patricia Non, who could no longer merely stand by while so many are suffering. However, there's also a danger of merely romanticizing the community pantries or the Philippine spirit of bayanihan, without seeing the need that catalyzes it. The qualities of caring with also challenges society, governments, and broader institutions to recognize the need behind why these pantries became widespread and to cooperate with people and promote just social transformation in response to that need. To conclude, caring justice as a concept we think is important for women moving forward in the Church and is something that the Church can continue to foster. Care is an important part of Catholic theology, Church history, and mission of spreading the gospel, where we are called to care for others in the spirit of the common good, giving each what is due to them in justice. This is especially important for vulnerable groups such as women in the Church and in the world, where women take on many burdens or are often not given what is due to them, nor are they taken care of with love. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Stephanie Puen. As you heard, Stephanie was proposing presenting the problems, especially the inequalities regarding the working conditions and the remuneration of the women during the COVID-19 time. Of course, these situations might have happened also in other countries of Asia. And she is proposing a program of caring justice. Caring, it's an expression which she gives in a wider perspective, how to deal with the women and so on. So let us thank Dr. Stephanie Puen for her presentation. Now we proceed to Dr. Mary Yuen. Mary Yuen teaches theology at the Holy Spirit Seminary of Theology and Philosophy in Hong Kong. Dr. Yuen will speak also for 10 to 15 minutes. Welcome, Yuen.
Your Eminence and all the participants of FABC, thank you for inviting me to share with you in this panel with the theme on the role of women for the Church in Asia. I'm Mary Yuen from Hong Kong. In this presentation,
Mary Yuen, you are not audible to us.
Experiences, and then I will share with you the challenges faced by women in the society and also in the church with my own reflection and some examples of pastoral responses. To start, I would like to share an experience of more than 20 years ago when I was still a young church worker at the Justice and Peace Commission in Hong Kong. I have a chance to participate in Bila on Women in Pattaya with other representatives from countries in Asian countries. We began from the life experience, visiting various marginalized groups, including sex workers, women laborers, and other women in distress. We also heard the experience of the workers who walk along with them and accompany them. Not only I was awakened, and I found this is a profound experience for me. And in this workshop, we also have a chance to listen to the leadership of committed women at the grassroots level, and also the analysis and experience of resource persons who have paid attention to these issues for a long time. And we also have group discussion to share our own reflection and theological reflection. I think this is a good example to show how we can transform our own experience and to learn from the grassroots women. When I went back to Hong Kong, in the Justice and Peace Commission, we set up a small working group and start producing Bible sharing materials for parish, and also produce an educational kit for Catholic school on gender issues. I myself also attend some feminist theology seminars in an ecumenical Christian organization, and I also study theology in the seminary in the evening. All these are my initial experiences concerning gender issues in the society and the church. And later, when I further studied, I also took some courses on this topic. I found this method of pastoral cycle or see-judge-act approach very useful in our theological reflection and pastoral planning. And I still use this method today. From this experience, you can see that FABC has started this journey of concerning women for quite some time. And in the recent FABC 50 documents, I found there's a paragraph on women. And I saw that they also, the bishops also pay attention and try to hear stories of women who are being discriminated, facing violence and oppression, and they have different kinds of experience. I won't repeat this because I think you all know it very well. And in addition to this, I would like to share a few points based on my own research which also show the challenges faced by women, including the foreign domestic workers, the migrant women from rural to urban area, and some low-income cleaning workers and abused women. So this example is female foreign domestic helpers in Hong Kong. Especially during the pandemic, we see many domestic workers have been forced to stay in home quarantine with employers because of the nature of their work. And some of them, unluckily, are being fired unexpectedly, unable to return home or return the families of their whereabouts. And many of them also face double or triple workload due to increased cleaning and sanitation needs. Some employers even impose unreasonable hygiene requirements on them. Many helpers are rejected to go out during their day offs because they were afraid being infected and spread to the family. So we see many challenges faced by the foreign domestic workers. So another group is the migrants in China. So the situation may be different because many of them live in rural area and they want to move to the city because they feel they are excluded from participation and developing their potentialities in their rural hometowns. They think they will experience a liberating sense of autonomy from parental, spousal, and other forms of authority, and a broadening of horizons when they migrate to urban areas. However, when rural women arrive in the city, they need to face other new problems. Most of the new jobs in the cities are temporary, physically exhausting, and low status, and often no security and very few welfare benefits. So women may face sexual harassment or abuse too. So these are some of the challenges faced by women in China. Apart from that, we also see many women street cleaning workers because in Hong Kong, most of the cleaning workers are women. Most of them receive very low income but a very heavy workload, especially during the pandemic. But they are without sufficient protection. So under the serious period of the pandemic, they have a high risk of being infected. And they need to strengthen themselves to voice out what they need. There are also other challenges faced by women, especially in East Asia. Because in East Asia, many women, in fact, are working women. They have to go out to work and also take care of their families. And also some are single mothers who have to take care of their kids. When during the pandemic, their kids have to stay at home to study. And during the pandemic, also more domestic violence occur in the family. There are some NGOs who conduct some survey showing that the call for help increased a lot. And even UN have a statistic showing that during the lockdowns, 20% surge in domestic violence. So in face of all this women's vulnerability, we have to explore how we can respond to them. Although they may have many difficulties, but vulnerability should not be the only object of concern. When we have chance to expose to these women, such encounter allow us to respond. And we should affirm that even the vulnerable women can be transformed and regain their capability through empowerment and solidarity actions. Women are agents of change for themselves, for their families, and for others. So I have a few points of reflection, and then I will share some examples of pastoral response which can strengthen women's power. Based on the notion of social friendship and political charity, which can be found in the social encyclical Fratelli Tutti, pastoral care should be provided to these disadvantaged women. And based on Mary's Magnificat, women as objects and subjects of liberation should be affirmed. In fact, they are object of history, they are subject of history and agents of change. Based on the notion of solidarity, women's capabilities should be empowered. For solidarity, it means upholding women's dignity and moral agency, redefining difference and making connection, supporting women's self-help group, advocating for social transformation, and also nurturing the virtue of charity in the church communities. Now I would like to show a few examples of pastoral care to the disadvantaged women. As I mentioned, many migrant domestic helpers face a lot of challenges, and some of them even lost the place to stay because their employers drive them away. And some church workers and also the volunteers form a team and try to look for temporary shelter to the migrant workers who have nowhere to go. And they also provide some basic necessities and food to them during this period of time. And in fact, taking care of the foreign domestic workers is a long-term pastoral care service. In the Hong Kong diocese, there is a pastoral center for the Filipinos and Indonesians. They provide pastoral care and also some material needs to them. They try to extend solidarity with the migrant workers through counseling service and also advocating rights for migrant workers. Temporary shelters also provided to them when there is a need for accommodation, especially during the transition of jobs or waiting for court cases. So, and this is an example of gathering the Indonesian migrant workers through some kind of workshops and formation. Through this kind of gathering, they try to learn skills and education in a secular society, and they are empowered and gain strength and capability. During this process, they exercise their agency and try to affirm their subjectivity. Apart from that, there are other pastoral responses from the church, for example, for the low-income workers. In Hong Kong, the Catholic Labour Commission with the labour centres try to organize cleaning workers and other low-income workers. And they have monthly gatherings and forming self-help group with them, trying to strengthen them and let them strengthen their confidence. So they try to express their own needs and try to even lobby the legislator to change the workers-related policy. And they share their own stories to the public through receiving interview with the media and also in the workshops or the church gatherings. For those who have need in families and are facing family crisis, our church social welfare agency Caritas also have a family crisis support center, providing counseling service to them and also trying to prevent the family crisis through some kinds of family service. And during the pandemic, they received lots of calls and requests from individuals and families through the hotline. And when they receive this request, they will try to provide different kinds of service to them, try to prevent suicide and also try to cope with the need when they receive help from domestic violence cases. So now we go to another part on the women in the church. We see some both positive signs and negative signs in women in the church. For positive signs, we can see there are more women theologians and ministers gathered together to theologize and discuss pastoral concerns, especially, for example, for the Ecclesia of Women in Asia, in which several of us in the panel are also members. Amor is a women religious group, and they gather together to discuss their pastoral concerns. And there are also other country-based associations for women's theological reflection. Apart from that, in some local churches in Asia, there are more and more female faithful playing an active role in the church affairs. For example, in Hong Kong, lay people are encouraged to attend different kinds of faith formation, including theology courses in the seminary. And when they finish their program, they would join different kinds of ministry, and some will go further study and become teachers and formators in the church. Some lay women also involved in planning and leading work in areas such as school education, theological education, social welfare services, and justice and peace ministry, etc. But at the same time, we also see some negative signs in certain Asian countries which follow traditional culture, for example, Confucianism, that does not affirm gender equality in practice. The local churches in these places may also follow the hierarchical culture, patriarchal practice, and incline to be clericalism. And in a conference, I heard a Catholic nun from China share her own experience, saying that even though women participate actively in church, but they cannot play a leading role. And this is because of the traditional mentality of the Chinese culture, as well as the Catholic patriarchal tradition, that only allow men serve in the leadership role. And this Catholic nun also heard from a parish priest who honestly admits that it is clericalism that shapes the ecclesial structure of the church. And women sometimes also do not aware that they can strengthen themselves and play a more important role. So finally, for my own reflection, I think, as all of you know, we all human beings were created in the image of God, an inherent dignity and value of women on the basis of the image of God. So women should also share the same equality and dignity in the church. Women are encouraged to participate at all levels of the church, not because they are women in terms of gender, but because they share their baptismal call as followers of Christ. They also have the potential to contribute to the church and building the kingdom of God in various ways. Many church teachings promote gender equality. However, there is still a big gap between the theory and the reality. Female church members are the majority, but they are insufficient in decision-making in church affairs. And the church teaching on gender complementarity may lead to the exclusion of women from leadership position. And we talk of synodality in these days. Based on this notion, the church leaders should try to listen to the voices of women and include them in the decision-making process, allowing them to take a greater role in ministries and evangelization. So to listen, to accompany, to be empathetic, and in solidarity with women are some key words. Finally, I would like to quote a few recommendations from Bila on Women on an FABC before. I think this suggestion need to be evaluated and see whether they have been implemented, and maybe we need to take further consideration. For example, to enhance the participation of women in all church organizations and councils. At the diocesan level, a committee be formed to address injustice, especially against women and children, and to take immediate actions. Women, including religious sisters, should be justly compensated for their work. And women's theology should be introduced in seminaries and formation centers. Women should be given support and opportunities to enable them to study theology and participate in other ministries. So thank you for allowing me to share with you in these sessions, and hope you have a fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Dr. Mary Yuen has very comprehensively presented to us the challenges that the women face in the society and in the church. And she has referred to the domestic violence and other problems in the society, especially during the COVID-19 season. And she said what women need is empowerment and a social and political partnership with men and so on, pastoral care. Although she is from Hong Kong, she knows also the situations of other countries in Asia, and she really appreciated the work of Caritas and also the church in the parishes and also in the institutions. But she also remarked that there is some kind of clericalism sometimes coming from the part of the church, and actually she is looking for the empowerment of women in general and also to equality of treatment for women and so on. Actually, it is a thought-provoking presentation that Mary Yuen has done. So let us thank Mary Yuen with a hand and thank you. Thank you very much, Yuen. We have a third speaker, and that is Sister Rasika Pieris of Colombo. She belongs to the Colombo Province of the Sisters of Holy Family in Sri Lanka. Sister Rasika Pieris. Yeah, she is already there. Welcome, Sister Rasika. We are ready to listen to you.
Good morning to all those who are part of the efforts of making the Church in Asia as Church of Asia, and I would like to extend my sincere gratitude for the invitation extended. My presentation consists of context in which I am making the proposals for the Church in Asia to be Church of Asia based on the following concerns, and finally reiterating on Asian praxis as the locus of theologizing and Christian living. Socio-political and religio-cultural traditions of a particular region can have a strong and enduring impact on the lives of people, as it does in Asia, where women have made remarkable progress in recent years and the transformation is possible. Asian women, who comprise more than a quarter of the world's population, are not a monolithic group of people. Yet, oppression of women is a major form of oppression in Asia. Suffering, though a common reality, is closely connected with sexism, classism, racism, militarism, and colonialism that are interlinked. But women of Asia suffer more than men. Lest we forget that the tradition of the Church deprived God's call of being women to exercise the call of God for the Church and society, including pastoral ministry and church leadership. For Gustavo Gutierrez, the poor has two key elements. First one, the poor are the victims of oppressive and unjust social structures. And secondly, the poor are the agents of change if they are equipped with skills and hope to create new horizons. Similarly, the poorest of the poor, the women of Asia, are not mere victims of an oppressive system, but are the social agents with the authority to transform unjust social and religious structures through resisting and becoming. Resisting to remain victims of traditions and rituals that prevent them being the agents of social transformation is a new norm that women of Asia adopted in order to experience liberation. They are the agency of representation, being the persons that they are called to be. The struggle for an equal society where they shall live with freedom and dignity instead of awaiting for the religious promise of freedom after death. The first point, theology from the perspective of women. Being the majority in the Church of Asia, women face marginalization through the power structures inclusive of the Church due to misogyny within the Christian tradition and notions of purity and taboos in Asian religious traditions. For a woman to reject what the dominating structures dictate is a taboo in the Asian context. What we have in many countries in Asia is a culture of suffering within a culture of domination. In the church, there is an extensive disagreement on women's status under various historical conditions due to social and religious construction of gender. Problematizing traditional gender roles is considered feminist. Hence, argued, feminism is a production of modern cultures which is contrary to biblical values. A woman's nonconformist approach to social status quo could be painted as unwomanly or deprived of woman qualities, because struggle for women's liberation has been criticized by the patriarchal system as both Western and bourgeois, for neither is applicable nor desirable in the context of Asia. Essentializing theology from the perspective of women is also depatriarchalization of theologizing in Asia. Any theology from Asia that does not touch the multi-layered oppression of Asian women is limited in scope and cannot liberate any person in Asia, because unless oppressed women are liberated, no one can be liberated. No one possesses the truth. Truth possesses the truth. Theology has to emerge from the historical reality of the people in a context. By claiming the power of naming, the Asian women transform mainstream theologies. Hopefully, this process of producing a new way of doing theology seeks to correct and complete the one-dimensional tunnel vision of society and of the organized religion of Asia. It generates a new way of thinking about faith, starting from reality and experience. This demands that the church listen to the alternative stories women offer in the struggle for liberation. Church also needs to find new ways of doing theology together with men and women, priests, laity, and religious in different social contexts. Second point, doing theology as Asian women. For Aloysius Pieris, a theology is not a rational explanation of our faith, but something emerging within a context of people, a dynamic involvement of a faith community. Hardly offering liberating alternatives to the situations of the oppressed, traditional theology does not recognize the struggle for freedom as a part of salvation. It is not correlated with the present experience. The absence of the social or structural dimension of sinfulness within the interpretation of sin in the institutional Christian understanding of salvation scarcely recognizes political liberation as an essential element for salvation. This understanding of soteriology paves the way to weaving human beings, especially women, who are the most oppressed in Asian society, as the passive recipients of the results of unjust systems. Alternative society building is a dream for many women where no hierarchical structures prevail. Therefore, forming alternative societal structures like the Christian women grassroots movement becomes essential. In the Church of Asia, there is a need to listen to women's experience, and women need to feel that they have been heard and have made a contribution to the life of the Church. When lived praxis becomes the axis for theologizing, the lived experiences of women cannot be excluded. The struggle of the women to resist oppressive structures open new avenues for reconstructing the existing theologies in Asia. The experience of poorest of the poor is an influential and essential source of deconstructing the theologies that have long been sustained by a conception of men's power over women. Third point, rethinking of the image of God that gives life to women. The maleness attributed to God or Christ is a stumbling block for an inclusive paradigm of the Church. In the reification of God as male, the God symbol is monopolized and man becomes the norm of full humanity. The action of making the symbol of the male God synonymous with power undergirds the hierarchical male church in which men are definers of codes and women are neurotic consumers. The concept of contingency of particularity as trajectory of the incarnation. In their struggle for liberation, many women found new names and places for God who empowers them resist suffering that is contrary to the traditional teachings that emphasizes the masculine attributes to God. If women are to see themselves as creatures made in the divine image, that is primary identity as the image of God, the language used to speak of God must reflect more than male symbolism, because language is not politically neutral, but rather serves as a tool of either or oppression, life-giving. Fourth one, new consciousness in the women and the church. Reading from androcentric perspective, texts such as the Bible, the prayer of the church, and liturgical lectionaries in the church does not affirm the equal dignity of women. Another remarkable factor for stagnation in affirming the dignity and mission of women in the church is the internalization of patriarchy by women. The system that affects all aspects of life of women and undermines their personhood in subtle ways. Women admit to accepting mankind, brethren, sons of God, he, his, and him as being inclusive of both genders. This portrays that women are subsumed by or no more than shadows of men. Raising awareness of the dignity and role of women in the church challenges the status quo in ecclesiology and theology. Awakening to the equal dignity of women and men include the acknowledgement of the God-given creation and baptismal dignity of the image of God. In consciousness raising, both women and men must take cognizance of the fact that the equality of believers, translating into shared and equal participation of women and men in all aspects of church life, is according to God's will. From hermeneutics of suspicion, women may draw inspiration and support from reclaiming the history of her story of their foremothers and foresisters in the Bible, whose voices have been muted or even silenced. Since patriarchal structures in both church and society have the potential for transformation, consciousness raising in conversion requires exposure of the overt and subtle ways in which men and women are entangled in the sin of patriarchy. Both women and men dream for the new humanity in Christ, and this could be reached through dialogue with women. Fifth point, women as full decision-making citizens. Elizabeth Susler Fiorenza defines Ecclesia of Women as a democratic congress of full decision-making citizens, while highlighting democratic equality, citizenship, and decision-making power as essential elements of the notion of ecclesia. The vision of the Ecclesia of Women is to struggle for change and liberation of God's life-giving and transforming power of the community in the midst of the structural sin of the hierarchical powers of exploitation and dehumanization. Sister Fiorenza proposes an alternative magisterium of Ecclesia of Women as the locus or place of divine revelation besides the Bible or the tradition of the patriarchal church. It would become a norm for Christian theology in which the preferential option for the poor becomes a preferential option for women, especially poor women. She speaks further about the same notion of Ecclesia of Women as a discipleship of equals, while reinterpreting the experience of the early Christian community who lived in solidarity from below. Within the discipleship of equals, all are learners and there are no masters. Each one learns from the other, which is the new paradigm of the alternative magisterium, the Ecclesia of Women, and the norm for Christian theology. Sixth point, learning from the other. In the view of Aloysius Pieris, each religion is a unique language and idiom with which the human mind in a given context has expressed its yearning for and its experience of integral liberation. Hence, in speaking about the liberation Christology of religious pluralism, he draws attention to two imperatives. First one, fidelity to what is unique to Christian faith. And second one, fairness towards every other religion's distinctive otherness, because the ultimate goal of every religion is the liberation of every human person and the whole human person, a soteriological absolute. Living in a religiously pluralistic continent, many Asian feminist theologians have found their own heritage as a new style to present the rich and multi-layered theological voices through symbols, images, songs, dances, stories with the aim of full liberation for all. The multiplicity of religious heritage that exists and interacts within and among Asians provides resources for a paradigmatic shift in the struggle for liberation. The interreligious and inter-ethnic gathering, dialogue, sharing, and worship extends the solidarity of both men and women for the common goal of working together for liberation. Seventh and the last point, coming to the understanding that men of quality are not threatened by women's call for equality. Realization of admitting that liberation of women is integral to the liberation of the whole of humanity is pivotal. The call for equality poses threat. For Henriette Katoku, it is caused by fear of loss of status, fear of what will happen when patriarchal structures mutate, but basically fear of the other. Overcoming male domination is a challenge for women in Asia while recognizing it as a sin, because patriarchy in the Asian context is not just a matter of male supremacy and male-centeredness, but also a socio-political and religio-cultural system of control and domination involving powerful over powerless. In the process of affirming the full humanity of women, The recognition of how a woman's particular context shapes her experience of oppression is not sufficient. It demands alternative ways of resisting elements that support patriarchy. The stereotyped Asian social landscape must change. Conclusion. The challenge that remains a concern for the Church of Asia is to distance herself from the colonial roots and its representations and make a paradigm shift from Eurocentrism to Asian centrism. Eurocentrism does not fully echo the Asian centric ideals of interdependence and interrelatedness, which are core values of Asian centricity. Nevertheless, being Asian centric does not relate to being contrary to Eurocentrism nor cultural separatism, rather using Asian praxis as hermeneutical lenses. Asian praxis demands moving from suppressionism to ecumenism, without which the making sense of the Church of Asia will be a futile exercise. Mimetic histories of leadership model that is vertical may not suit as the context demands an inclusive structure that is horizontal, that ensures the participation of people from all walks of life. For the Church of Asia to choose the preferential option for the women is ensuring the preference God adopted by taking the side of the oppressed. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Rasika Pieris. Being a human rights activist, Sister has dealt with the theme of the liberation of women, especially poor women, in detail. Many of the analysis is really thought-provoking and also as a challenge for bishops and the leaders in the society to deal with. But you said that the poor are the agents of change. These are really very, very important statements. And you said about cultural domination of men in Asia. And of course, we know that the Asian culture is different from the Western culture, and there are many things to be corrected. And you have well studied this question of equality of women in the church, and also the role that they have to play in the church and the society. I think the bishops will surely take your paper or your presentation seriously and will discuss this matter in our own dioceses and take appropriate approaches in this matter. So that we are very grateful to you for having presented the problem and also proposed so many areas of action for us. And we thank you. The name of all the bishops, thank you very much. May God bless you. Now let us spend 2 minutes in prayer. We will be talking to them now. Up to 15. Okay. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit,